through some of these. So the three big pieces that we pulled, as Dave mentioned, there's over 200 new features, but we're not going to sit here and go one by one, as fun as that may be for some of us. But instead, I felt we would be best to just take three main topics and kind of dive into each one a little bit more. We're going to talk about some new features, some new products, and also some upgrades to existing features and products in these three categories. So we'll start with security. That's a huge topic. It has been for a long time, but I think now so even more. Ransomware becoming more and more prevalent. We have ransomware as a service, complete with call centers, customer service. They can take your payments online. It's pretty amazing, as horrible as it is. And so ransomware being a big factor, we've implemented a number of things. Now, if you're already a Veeam user or you're thinking about using Veeam, I do recommend that you Google Veeam best practices or veeambp.com, and it'll bring you to our best practice website. And they've got a whole section on security. So from a best practices perspective, creating separate domains and separate VLANs and just, implementing a good strategy for 3-2-1, 3 copies of your data, two media, 1 offsite. So that's all things that you should have and laying a good foundation. But in addition to that, Veeam has come up with a number of features and products that help with security. And that's going to be things like data immutability and hardened Linux repositories. Those are probably our 2 biggest right now. So immutability just means that it can't be touched, it can't be changed, right? That's the literal definition. And so when we talk about data immutability from an IT perspective, we're really talking about the inability to write to those backups or to that data, and also the ability in terms of backups, the inability to delete those. So if you start with your internal environment, and we just think about the fact that ransomware can be malicious, it can also be accidental. Maybe you wouldn't call it ransomware, but it's the same kind of thing, right? It has the same result. Your data is gone, your data is missing, your data is corrupted. So from an internal perspective, if you think about a Veeam server that has access to the backup repositories and the production data, that's how we do what we do, right? We take your production data, we turn it into a Veeam file, and we send it to the storage of your choosing. And so you have, as the backup administrator, or your customers have that access to change retention policies, to delete backups, and these immutability settings are simply flags that we put on repositories to say, hey, anything that goes in here, don't let it be deleted. Don't let it be written to. It's read-only at this point. So it's stopping somebody from just, undoing that, unchecking that box, right? Well, so from an immutability perspective, we start with object storage. And object storage, you think of, Azure Blob, Amazon S3, Wasabi. There's a lot of different object storage providers. Storcom leverages their own object storage as well. But with some of these object storage providers, what we can do is we can place this immutability lock on the bucket, is what we like to call it, up in the object storage world. And so basically you have a repository, you're sending data there, it's pay as you go. It's usually cheaper than traditional disk-based storage. And within the Veeam console, you can set these immutability locks, which means that not only can I not delete the backups, even if I were to set my retention to a shorter period than the immutability period, that immutability period would trump the actual Veeam retention. Even if I unchecked the immutability box, as I mentioned, even if I tried to delete that repository from my infrastructure, nothing is going to change those backup files once they are in that repository until that immutability period has ended. As a matter of fact, the only way that you could completely delete that data would be to log into the object storage account as the administrator. And it's even tough to delete the individual items in there. You would actually have to blow away the whole account. And so if you set that account up with multi-factor authentication and some other security methods, it would be pretty almost impossible to delete all of the data, both from the on-prem side or the Veeam side, as well as the object storage side. So
yeah,
that was.
That's great. Oh,
go ahead.
No,
David,
I was going to just mention that that's where so the whole I think the whole focus on data immutability and some of the a couple of things that I thought of is that in version 10 Veeam had threat protection. insider threat protection, right? Which is one of the things I thought was cool, right? It protected people from maliciously deleting data or changing the data on the source side. But with what version 11 is now bringing, and some of the things that we've already got running in our data center with the hardened Linux repository, now it's protected on both sides, right? You've got that, you have, malicious activity from the source or on the destination side. You're protecting against that data. So I mean, they've taken what they were originally starting to build as a foundation and now taking it to the next level.
Yeah, that's awesome, David. Yeah, I agree too. Like you said, with the and that's a great point, is the insider protection for Cloud Connect. And for those who aren't familiar with that, it's just a way of, when you send backups to a service provider like Storcom, they can check a box, right? And so you, as the customer, can go in and you can say, hey, I want to delete all the backups that I sent to my cloud provider. But that backup repository is only presented to you at a certain level, right? Which is like the folder. You can't see past that. You don't have credentials to the actual box running. So from your side, you're protected, but maybe from the other side, if they were also hit, the data could be lost. So with this Linux hardened repository that David's mentioning, you can set the immutability on the actual backups, but then you harden the repository by not having to store the Linux repository credentials, like pseudo credentials perhaps, on the Veeam server itself. We use single sign-on instead. So to David's point, you're protected from both sides. And that's kind of the theme of our security, is just, going from these different storages that we work with, whether it's a cloud provider, a public cloud, Linux, Windows, just having different ways to leverage, some protection from ransomware and deletion.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point. So then after that point, so what potentially is your threat then, right? If I can't delete the data within the repository, the only thing left at that point is basically destroying the actual volumes that the data has been written to, and that in itself can be protected too through things like encryption and MFA. The disk subsystem itself, we can stop, even a rogue administrator from deleting data by locking that volume and saying only through a multi-factor process with, there's a couple of different ways to do this, but you can basically have it so that you have to have two levels of authentication and administration access to be able to delete a volume. So even if some bad actor was doing something to potentially delete the data, somebody else would have to be involved with that process. So not even, what I'm really referring to is like even deleting a LUN off of a SAN where the data was being written to, you can't even do that. So once the data is written there, it's there as long as that retention policy set.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I was just going to add to that, David. That's a great concept to think about, right? Because a lot of times we get asked, like, what kind of certifications does Veeam have? Is Veeam HIPAA? Is Veeam SOX? And there are certain categories where we do fall into those. And yes, whatever certifications, FIPS compliance, all that, we do check those boxes. But a lot of times we're not involved. We can encrypt the data at a software level, but to David's point, working with trusted service providers like Storcom and the likes who think about those kinds of things. It's not just encrypting the data at the software level, but also the hardware level, right. the physical building itself, the whole kit and caboodle. So that's a good point.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that you just segued into a great point. So let's just talk about SOC 2 and things like that, right? So Veeam's not responsible for being SOC 2 compliant. The person who's ultimately holding the data is, and it's the processes and procedures they have in place. And I think one thing that's at least important to point out here, that Veeam is the backup technology, the data protection, they're in the data protection business, right? So they're protecting the data where it finally lands up. But still, that does not mean, at really the first place to start this process is at the, where the source is, which is the endpoints. So, this, not to get into different technologies, but, a good endpoint protection strategy is still the best way to thwart, potential problems here. Veeam is putting all this in place, but hopefully you never even have to get to this point if you have the right solutions in place to stop the data from being, maliciously accessed or hampered with in any way before it even gets to Veeam. Veeam is putting this in place, but that doesn't mean, It doesn't mean that not having a good endpoint protection solution in place is not something that you don't need that just because you're using Veeam. I'm sure everybody at Veeam would still agree. You have to protect it at all different angles.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep, that's great, David. We have some questions, so maybe we can answer those before we move on to the next topic. Did you have anything else on security, David?
Not other than, the other thing which I think, kind of plays into maybe the next topic, but also the ability now from an object storage standpoint, Veeam's capabilities around archive tiers, and supporting, Glacier and Azure cold storage, even Storcom as a cloud, as a cloud connect provider, and providing data immutability copies. There is still a place for this deep archive tier, and I think that also plays into that what you said before, the whole 3-2-1-0 copies of data. Keeping as many copies of data as possible, and especially for those long-term copies, where are you going to do that most cost effectively? There's no doubt that technologies like Glacier and Azure cold blob storage financially have some significant benefits.
Absolutely.
And because the fact that you have to, there's a process to pull the data back. It's not directly accessible. It means that it is in essence immutable because you don't have direct access to it.
Sure, that's a good point too. Awesome, and yeah, I think that does segue really well into our next section. I'm sorry, Heidi, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to say we have a question.
Awesome.
Somebody is asking, what happens if you make a typo when setting the retention policy?
That's a good question. Yeah, you want to grab that one, David, or I can get it?
Well, I think if I want to further clarify, I believe what the person's saying is if you make a mistake and you make the retention policy either too short or too long, that retention policy is being set within if you use a Linux hardened repository, that's going to be set to whatever you set it to. So if you did make a typo, unfortunately, that data would either be kept for a lot longer than you expected, but you can't reverse this. There's no reversal. So if you set, let's just say hypothetically, you wanted to have a 1 month retention and instead you changed it to a 1 year retention, you'd be stuck holding that data for 1 year. There's no way to revert that. That's the whole purpose of this. It's basically built on, so within Linux, there's an XFS file system. That's the latest file system that Linux is using. And these are flags that Veeam is basically just leveraging the XFS file system. This is not something that Veeam created. This is something that's built in within Linux. So they're leveraging technology within Linux. That flag cannot be changed. It's like if everybody's familiar with the read-write attributes on a file system, there's additional flag there, and if that flag has been triggered, you can't make a change to it. Now, on the flip side, if you made it too short, the same thing would happen. If you meant to have it 1 year and you set it to 1 month, you could keep the retention policy longer if you caught that mistake and changed it. But if you didn't, it would theoretically die off and somebody could go through and delete that data. So hopefully that answers that question for whoever it asked that. But it does mean you got to be careful when you're setting this stuff.
Yep, that's spot on. I had some similar issues with my AWS account, creating some of that immutability and having to go through a lot of work to eventually delete that. I had to wait, and then I still had to do some additional stuff even after that. So,
you brought something up the other day. You and I were having a conversation, which if anybody here has even started to look at or thought about using insider threat protection with version 10. You can effectively, if you have that turned on, plus you had data immunity turned on version 11, you could land up with a really messed up retention policy, which could cost you, a significant amount of storage because the two things would basically be kind of creating a loop between the two of them. So
yes,
once you go to version 11, you don't want to use insider threat protection anymore.
Yeah, so if you're using an object storage or a Linux, repository, hardened repository.
Right, awesome. Correct. Right. If you're not using either one of those, then yes, then insider threat protection is fine to use.
Cool.
So I think that segues into talking a little bit about cloud mobility.
All right. So I'll tell you what, I kind of rambled on that last one. So let me set the stage for this, and then I'll ask you, David, what you guys are seeing or what your thoughts are, and we can expand from there. So what I like about cloud mobility, and I'm on the tech side. I'm not usually onto the marketing sales side of the house, but I do like the term cloud mobility. It really captures what Veeam is trying to do. So, if you kind of take a step back from where Veeam started, we only backed up VMware machines, and that was it. And then we released support for hypervisors, more hypervisors, then physical. Then we started getting into the SaaS offerings of O365. And then we saw, oh, look, all these machines running in Azure, AWS, Google. We want to back those up natively as well. And then, of course, the object storage that we kind of hinted to in the previous section. And so now what we're doing is we're bringing all these products up to be able to natively back up workloads living in the cloud, backing up on-prem into cheaper cloud options like an object store, and being able to kind of go back and forth between those. And I'll expand on that in a little bit. But David, what are kind of your thoughts when you hear cloud mobility in terms of Veeam?
I would say, I would resonate exactly what you're saying. I mean, I think that certainly shows the kind of the direction and vision. The one thing I was going to bring up, and I know this is not necessarily a version 11. It's not necessarily a version 11 feature, but I think it shows kind of more the direction that the company's going. So with things like cloud native applications like Kubernetes, and the recent acquisition of Kasten K10, which is a backup technology for Kubernetes, although it's not yet part of the platform, obviously I'm sure in things like version 12 it will be. That really shows their commitment to, hey, we need to understand how to back up all these different types of technologies. And when you look at cloud native, that's really where you start to see the mobility piece, because now I can take, in theory, you can easily back up a Kubernetes, environment on-prem, move that to a, public cloud, and then move it from one public cloud to another public cloud just based upon what your needs are. And Veeam, clearly I think is showing that direction there. So I think that really ties into all the things that you just mentioned, which is, you started off with just doing VMs, and that has just really progressed here, which I think is really cool that's kind of where they're going with it. And if anybody that's listening has any interest in understanding more about what Veeam is doing specific to cloud native, we have a lot of stuff running in our own environment now, and have the capabilities to, show how that all works. And that in itself is a whole nother webinar, in itself, just to go into that.
Perfect. Yeah, Kubernetes is another great one that I didn't even really think about, but you're right. I mean, that is in the cloud, appless or serverless apps and all this. So when I think of cloud mobility, I really, like I mentioned, like to talk about, first it was O365. And I'll admit O365 is kind of its own standalone product, but it does have the same capabilities that our other Veeam products have, like application aware for Exchange, being able to put emails back in mailboxes and things like that. So one of the big points here is that as we have these different products that we're trying to, tackle all these new things in the industry as things change all the time, but we're also trying not to spread ourselves too thin. So, it would be great if we just immediately had, products for everything in the world, but we don't want to just throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks. That's why, like, our NAS backup took a lot longer. People were surprised we didn't have that for a while, because we really try to integrate these things into one solution. So if you're backing up into the public cloud, if you're backing up workloads that are in the public cloud, we're starting to integrate those with our core product, which is backup and replication. So some examples would be, I have some on-prem, let's say VMware servers, and I got a couple physical servers too. So I'm going to deploy a backup and replication server to natively take snapshots of my VMware VMs. I'm going to push out 2 agents for the physical backups, and those are all managed under one backup and replication server, just 2 different kind of job processes. Going to an on-prem disk-based repository, maybe it's Linux hardened like we talked about previously, but then from there, I want to have my second copy up in an object storage, like an Amazon, at whatever your object storage platform choice is. And so now you've got your 3-2-1. You've got copies of your backups, one on-prem, one off-site. You got backups for both physical and virtual, all managed by one application. I can take those backups and I can restore them to a different public cloud, like an AWS to Azure. I can restore them back on-prem. Then we talk about our workloads in Azure AWS. I can back those to on-prem and restore those to on-prem or move them around as well.
Yeah. Yep. I think that and that really is the whole concept of this mobility, and what Veeam is providing is that same kind of foundation that you said with serverless apps and the ability to move everything around. Well, now I want to be able to have that same capability with any of these workloads and being able to move data around from one cloud provider to another. One of the reasons why also one of the things that we do when we do cloud assessments, so why would I move my workload from one cloud provider to another? Like the ability to go to your electric company and say, I don't want to pay what you're charging me for electricity. I'm going to go to a different electrical company, which I don't think there's very many places in this country yet that still have ever gotten that premise to work. I think we all still get our electricity from one provider or another, but the concept was originally you were supposed to be able to do that. So that was the same thing as going whether it's GCP, AWS, or Azure. I don't want to be locked into a monopoly from a pricing standpoint and also availability standpoint. I want to potentially be in two different regions. Well, I don't want to necessarily be within the two regions on the same vendor necessarily. Maybe I want to build my environment on Azure on East Coast and put my the another side of the application set on the West Coast, but on AWS. And having the ability to take these workloads and back them up and move them, between vendors becomes very, very useful.
Yep. I think that's a good point too, is, a lot of times, it's the old cliche, and I say it all the time, but it's so true. People say my data's safe because it's in the cloud, and the cloud's just somebody's computer, right? If you look, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody because this can happen to, to pretty much any cloud or IaaS environment, but Microsoft, there was a bug in a Microsoft patch in their Microsoft Online for Office 365. And this bug just started mysteriously deleting people's SharePoint and Teams information, which is a shameless plug. That's why you need backup for Office 365 by Veeam. But, to that same point, Azure, AWS, they've had outages for a while, and they offer geo redundancy, and the data comes back up. And but you may want to have, like David said, some stuff in Azure, some stuff in AWS, or different regions. I'll tell you a great example. This is more. I only work with service providers like Storcom, but just to kind of get a perspective, this could be you as a customer that you're looking for this need. But we had a service provider who wanted to offer IaaS and have their customer have their whole infrastructure running in their location. And this customer was currently using a large cloud provider. I won't say who. There wasn't anything wrong with them. They just were a little pricey, and they were looking for a better deal, better setup. So this service provider, a Veeam service provider, wanted to use our tools to migrate 500 machines out of this public cloud and into their on-prem. So we are able to do that. We're able to do that with agents, or for if it's some of the other public clouds we work with, like Veeam Backup for Azure, AWS, or Google. We can back up those machines and we can send them to an on-prem location, and you can begin the restore process. So we were able to do that in a pretty timely fashion, pretty efficiently. There's a lot of stuff around cloud mobility. There's a specific scenario that kind of will lead us into our next piece as well. But before I talk on that, David, anything else on cloud mobility?
Nothing other than I would say you kind of hit on this, but I mean, this is my shameless plug, but I mean, an example there is O365 backups, right? And I could easily back that up to object store within Azure Cold Storage or whatever it may be, but maybe I don't want to be tied for that backup to, the provider who's providing. I mean, obviously Azure and Microsoft are providing the entire solution at that point. Well, we can be the target using our object store for that, really doomsday copy of your data. and you're not tied to Microsoft, at least for all aspects of your data protection.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I think we've covered a lot of ground there with what's going on with cloud mobility.
Awesome.
And I think there'll be even more exciting stuff coming in the future.
I hope so. So far, it's been a ride for me. I've been at Veeam for almost 4 years now, and wrapping my head around all the products and staying up to date. It's challenging, but it's exciting for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. So, to kind of piece all this together too, it's kind of interesting. I'm just kind of noticing this as we talk, but these all kind of run into each other in some way or another, right? Security, some of that security is built into our cloud mobility. Cloud mobility, some of that is built into our recoverability. So two big things that we see here, and these are just a couple. I mean, backup and replication, has all kinds of different ways to recover your data, but CDP, or continuous data protection, and expanded instant recovery are what Storcom and I decided on for this specific webinar. And I want to talk about expanded instant recovery first, because it kind of ties back to the cloud mobility piece. So let's imagine, like I said, being able to go in and out of any cloud, between clouds, back to on-prem. So imagine you've got some workloads running in, let's say, AWS, right? And so I'm using Veeam Backup for AWS, which, by the way, that's our most mature of those three products. It's on version 3. It can do relational databases, back up your virtual private configuration, etc. But from the EC2 perspective, the machines that run in AWS, so we're backing all those up natively. We're storing them within an S3 bucket, right? So we can back up directly to Amazon's object storage. So that data's there, and that's all good and fine. We can replicate those snapshots to different regions. So we do have a lot of ability within AWS to back up and keep that data redundant and durable or available. But what if we want to migrate some of that on-prem, or we want to have another copy of that? Well, first of all, we can send that. We can do a backup copy of that data to, say, Storcom's Cloud Connect, for instance, right? And so directly from that S3 to another cloud, a private cloud, being Storcom. Now they've got your data. They can do a lot more for you because, they're official Veeam, providers. They know the stuff in and out. You can talk to these people a lot easier than you can reach out to AWS. In addition to that, let's say you've got a little on-prem location, and you've got a Veeam server. Now, this is great when customers have multiple workloads. They've got some on-prem, they've got some in the cloud, all of it managed by one backup server. You've got a backup for AWS in AWS. That's a machine backing up all those instances. I can restore those EC2 instances, or those Amazon machines, as virtual machines, let's say to VMware or to Hyper-V. I might even have like a Veeam appliance, just a big Windows box with Veeam and Hyper-V on it, because Hyper-V is cheaper, let's face it. And then you could take those Amazon machines and spin them up as Hyper-V machines. So that's kind of the one of the features of the instant recovery. The instant Veeam recovery has been around for a while with Veeam, but now we can do two things. We can instantly restore any image-based Veeam backup to VMware instantly, or we can also do the same thing now with Hyper-V. So that's VMware to Hyper-V, Hyper-V to VMware, physical to virtual, and cloud native to on-prem hypervisor, like that I just mentioned. David, what are your thoughts on that? Anything stick out for you specifically?
The only thing I was going to add was, I think you touched on most of it, but I would also talk about some of the stuff with instant recovery now of SQL and Oracle databases. And there's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, instead of having to restore an entire system, I can now restore a database. Maybe a developer, or maybe somehow or another a table got dropped, or there was an issue, data corruption. I can restore a database instantaneously, or almost the more useful purpose of this would be, I've got a dev or a QA environment, and I want to do some testing, and I want to take a copy of production, and I may be taking, depending on what the recovery point objective is, but I may be taking multiple copies a day of this database. I can take that, I can mount that up to a different system, and allow people to start doing testing, and maybe run a report against something, and I'm not sitting there waiting for an entire database to be restored. Data is growing exponentially, and that also means databases are too. We have clients that just a few years ago had 200 gig databases for their main production databases, and those things are now 2 terabytes. A 2 terabyte database is going to take some time, no matter whose technology is to restore it. And if I can restore an entire database instantaneously and have users being able to, or developers being able to access that data, pull reports, do things against that database, I think that's a huge benefit. And now with this expanded recoverability capability, that's one of the things that we're seeing, clients of ours being very interested in. And I think also you mentioned, with CDP, us as a solution provider, one of the benefits to us now and to our clients is, CDP is not new. CDP is new to Veeam.
Mm-hmm.
Up to this point, we've had to use point solutions. So we have, there are some very specific reasons where CDP, even previously, was of a value. Veeam has had replication for, and that's all based on snapshot-based replication.
Right.
And the snapshot-based replication is great for those point-in-time copies, and the recovery time objective is low, but there is overhead that occurs within the snapshot process. And for OLTP databases where I'm highly transactional, taking that pause in IO may not be acceptable. So what we've had to do is create, point solutions basically for these typically databases for clients who can't handle that pause in IO. And we went up by having to bolt another product on because they're using Veeam for backup, and maybe they're using some Veeam for backup along with instant recoverability, then replication for the lowest recovery time objective, and then we've had to have a point solution for that highest tier application where we have to have the lowest RPO and RTO. And now with the Veeam CDP being built into the solution, we can now have a single platform that's able to manage basically the entire business continuity lifecycle process. And I think that for us is probably the biggest advantage. Understanding how all these applications tie together, what's going to be the right way to protect them, and also having the flexibility to say, okay, for these 3 machines, maybe it's only 3 or 4 machines I need to use CDP for,
Mm-hmm.
because those are the ones that have the lowest RPO and RTO, and I don't want to take the pause and IO for things like replication. Now we don't have to sit there and have a whole separate solution to do that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We're excited.
Yep. I'm excited. A lot of the engineers who have been here for a while, we've been hearing, whisperings of CDP for a while, and it was supposed to come out, and And I think it's just another, reason why, again, we really make sure that our features and our products are fleshed out before we just try to, rush out. So with the CDP, if it's okay, David, I think I'm going to give just a quick little rundown. I think you did a great job of capturing at a high level the difference between CDP and replication. So let's just dig a little deeper. So as David mentioned, backup and replication, that's our product. And for those who may have, sometimes the word replication gets thrown around too. So we don't mean, a copy of a backup. A replica is a literal one-to-one. I have machine A here. I also have machine A1 over here. That's a close to point-in-time copy. And the RTO, as we mentioned, the recovery time objective. If somebody says, I need to be able to be up and running in 15 minutes, well, that's fine. Replication can handle that, no problem. When somebody says, I need to be up in 15 minutes, and I also can't afford any difference in data, between these machines within a period of 1 minute. Okay, well, now we're going to need to look at CDP because replicas relying on snapshots can take, I would say 15 minutes is a pretty good number, even on like the higher end systems. And even if you so you can go into our Veeam server and you can set your replication job to continuous. And that used to throw people off. Oh, there we go. I got continuous data protection. Well, not really. What continuous means is as soon as I'm done with a snapshot, I'll do it again. How long is that going to take? However long it's going to take, right? Which depends on your system and whatnot. So now with CDP, we're not relying on snapshots at all. Now it's interesting because if you were to go into vSphere and look, it would look like we are creating snapshots because the file formats, these flat VMDKs and whatnot, are being created. but we're not using VMware's API to create a snapshot. We are writing this directly on the IO filters, directly into VMware. And so what this means in more layman's terms is I can set a policy and say, I want a recovery point objective of 60 seconds. Okay, now that doesn't mean, this is not journaling live replication. Every block that I change is immediately copied. What it means is every 60 seconds, let's just say proxy B is on the DR side, is going to talk to proxy A and say, hey, what's changed in the last 60 seconds? Well, I've got these blocks that have just changed in the last 60 seconds. Cool. Let me update those blocks to machine B over here. And so that's going to be your crash consistent short-term retention, right? You don't want to keep 60-second changes, in the journaling for too long of a time. So you'd probably keep those. And keep in mind that the more frequently you want to update your blocks and the length of time you want to keep those changes is going to dramatically increase the amount of disk space in the data store you're going to need to hold all that. So what we do then is we start to kind of relax a little bit. I've got these minute changes or these 5-minute changes, whatever, for the day or for the last 6 hours, whatever you need. And then maybe after that, I start thinking about, after a couple of days, I'm going to do a daily long-term retention. And these can be application aware. So, your crash consistent minute by minute changes, then the application aware as we start to go into the dailies. And from there, you can also, you can use a combination like David mentioned. You can do replication for tier 2s, CDP for tier 1s, and maybe backups for everything, because you should always have a backup as well. It's not really a replacement for either one.
Yeah. No, and I think that's I think that's a good description of kind of the differences between there. And you mentioned one thing, the CDP being crash consistent. That's the other big, as I was kind of pointing out, that's the other big difference here, right? So with Veeam replication or any replication technology, because when we use the word replication, we're meaning a full point in time copy. Even if it's at the storage level, it's a point in time copy. It's not a continuous stream of that data. And with a VMware snapshot, best case scenario, if you're doing a VSS integrated snapshot, meaning it's using volume shadow services, it's communicating with the database, it's quiescing the database. The other thing too is things like with Veeam replication, you can do things like truncating logs and doing log backups, etc. With CDP, none of that exists because the VM itself is not even aware that it's really being touched. It's happening at the hypervisor level, and as Brandon mentioned, it's using a filter driver to basically split the I/O rights. So that's the biggest difference there, and that means that's why in a CDP technology we don't have things like I/O overhead on the database. So when VMware snapshot gets taken, there is a process that has to occur once the snapshot is completed. It has to be cleaned up, called stunning, and that stunning process can cause a pause in I/O, which absolutely can be proven that will relate right back to database disconnects and things like blocking and so forth. So that's where we've seen these issues, and that's why we've always had to use CDP in those places. And now, I think Veeam has really rounded out their offering by providing that capability, so that now a single platform is able to do all of this. And I think you'll find that, as you said, you still got to take backups. Mm-hmm. Replication is only typically, even with Veeam replication, you're not keeping days worth of, replicas. There's no reason to. That's typically, maybe you keep 8 hours worth of replicas or something like that, your last 8 snapshots or something. And then with CDP, it's going to be even tighter. The backups are there for that long-term retention.
Yep. You got it. Well, David, I don't know about you, but that's all I got. I think we really wrapped these three into a good theme for V11. There's a whole bunch of other things that have come out, and we're happy to have those one-offs. If there's any questions anyone else had, or I don't know if David or Heidi, if you guys had anything else.
I don't have anything else. I don't know if there's any questions. I can't see my screen, so I got this presentation up.
I did have a question about whether or not Google Cloud was native now.
Yeah, so we do
Randomly.
have backup for Google Cloud. It is on version 1. It is one of our newest products. But yes, we do have the ability to natively back up workloads running in Google.
Yeah, and I think as Brandon said, I mean, if anybody wants to have one-off conversations, if you want to see any of this stuff in action, we've got, you know, in our environment, we've got labs set up where we can show this. Veeam can obviously show this stuff too. Cast and K10, if anybody's doing anything with Kubernetes, has any interest in that, that's another area where I think there's a lot of value that comes from this whole kind of cloud mobility concept and how, you know, all these workloads can be moved around. And I think there'll be a continued expansion there from Veeam's portfolio standpoint.
Now, another question was about whether or not there was vendor lock-in.
I think, yeah, that's a good. Oh, yeah, that's actually a valid question. And I'm assuming that probably had to do kind of with around CDP. Unlike SAN, because I started to go down this path, right? So SAN-based replication would be a point in time copy. Now that is not necessarily using VMware. So if you went from storage vendor A to storage vendor A and you did snapshot to snapshot, that doesn't necessarily affect the VMs themselves, but you are locked into the storage vendor's technology. With Veeam replication or Veeam CDP, now you have the ability to go from any storage vendor to any storage vendor because it's happening at the hypervisor level. So I think that's a good question. Whoever asked that.
And the next question is Google Drive backup available yet, or is it on the roadmap?
Yeah, so it's not currently available. The only thing we can back up today is virtual machine, like regular virtual machines running in Google. I wouldn't be surprised to see it. If you can, if you have access to the Veeam forums, if you could put a feature request in there, those are could do really well when we get enough of them from our customers and partners. And those are monitored and responded to by the actual product management team. They'll reach out to you and ask, you know, what are your use cases for this, and you know they'll get to you. Yeah, so hopefully we will see that.
I'm going to put that one in there. We use Google Drive.
There you go. Yeah, I always say, I mean, I can do these things for you, but they'll be, you know, it's a lot better when it comes from our customers and partners. And I've single-handedly seen, you know, feature requests that get added because of enough plus ones. So,
can you explain the dependency on SSH protocol?
Sorry. Is that question specific to? I mean, it sounds like maybe the person's asking about within Linux, within the Hardened Linux repository. There's a number of advancements on how, basically, they've added features to basically allow you to basically automatically turn off SSH based upon a certain amount of time for getting into the Linux repositories and so forth. I'm assuming that's probably where the question is coming from. I mean, I would say that's one of the, you know, those are some of the smaller enhancements, but basically they're all based around, you know, security and how to make, you know, this hardened Linux repository more secure. I don't have the whole list in front of me, but that is one of them that basically disabling SSH after a certain amount of time, because initially when the repositories get set up, you need to have SSH access. So there's also some stuff around the users and the types of users that have access to this. It's really just better ways to lock down these servers that have the repositories on them.
Yep, I agree. And I'll be honest, I don't know much more into it than that. But I do know that we can, you know, when Veeam adds a repository to its infrastructure, to its backup infrastructure, it is going to ask for those credentials. A lot of times, depending on how you set it up, those could be like sudo root credentials, and those are stored in the Veeam database. So bypassing this by making the repository a hardened repository, you can use single sign-on instead. So I think I've got some information here too that I can put in the chat if you need, and if you want to dive a little deeper, I'm sure we can find somebody that can explain it a little deeper if you have some specific questions around that.
Yeah, that's something certainly we can again show someone if they want to see.
Next question would be, what type of reporting tools does Veeam have?
So we have a few different reporting tools. If we're talking about from the customer's perspective, for your own internal environment, there's a product called v11. So v11 is our monitoring and reporting product. It's going to take a look at your virtual infrastructure, whether it's VMware Hyper-V. You can also take a look at the physical machines that you have, your repositories, your data movers, and then monitor, CPU utilizations, data store provisioning, oversized, undersized VMs. There are some possible ransomware monitoring reports that look for heavy CPU spikes or unusual writes. You can put some scripts in when a specific action happens to say, turn the machine off or disconnect it. And then lots of, kind of morning coffee dashboard reports, get a list for like DR planning. There's also another product called the Veeam Availability Orchestrator. This is a mix of both testing your backups as well as providing like documentation, C-level type documentation to be DR ready, test your recovery plan. So depending on what you're looking for, I'd say one of those two products would probably cover it.
Yeah, we use the Veeam Availability Orchestrator from a business continuity standpoint to provide, when we do testing, to provide an audit trail. So that's one of the things that allows you to do is build out those recovery plans and then create basically a document that can be turned over to auditors for the purposes of saying, we did all these tests and these tests were successful and they were done at this date and it took this long, et cetera, et cetera, to meet the SLAs. I don't know if that's specifically what the person was asking about, but that is one thing that Veeam does very nicely. Anything else, Heidi?
The next question is, how do I get in touch with Storcom for more information? And will a recording of today's presentation be sent out? I think, Brandon, you can head back to the last slide, and that gives our website address. And Dave, you can give a last pitch of Storcom.
The last slide. I think you can answer the question. I mean, there is a recording of this, right? That'll go up. We're on our website or on YouTube and on LinkedIn. I think a number of different places. So yes, that'll be available. Our contact information is available on our website, and certainly look forward to talking to anybody who has any interest, and we can certainly follow up. And if there's something specific you'd like somebody to follow up sooner, drop a line in the chat window, and we'll set up a call and talk with you. And I think thank you, Brandon, very much for taking the time today. Brandon McCoy from Veeam. Thank you, Heidi, for putting this together, and we can send out a quick follow-up message to everybody with the link to where this is on the website. And we covered a lot of good stuff, and maybe we'll do another one here soon and talk about some of the other features in version 11. Again, there's over 200, so didn't really have time for 200. We did a pretty good job of filling this one up to 55 minutes, so I guess it worked out. We didn't have the demos after all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys, and thanks for everyone for joining today.
Thank you very much.
All right, bye.